So Greg and I shot that, and we had a hidden, it was all hidden camera. They had no idea what was going on, and we actually set up a camera where we could watch them. And so it was interesting because obviously we couldn't show everything that happened in the video, but it was interesting to see the dialogue and the interaction, and they all dealt with it differently, didn't they? They either just avoided it completely. You had Ellis, who decides, I'm just going to crawl under the table if I don't see it. Even said, I just didn't want to look at it, right? And so he gets under the table, and then the little boy in the hat's my son. It's just this sheer willpower, which I cannot believe that he didn't eat it. But he just had this willpower of, okay, I'm not going to do it. And you could hear some of them, the door wasn't even shut, and they were right into it, right? So you don't deal with it. You just do it. Why even wait when there's something good right in front of you? Why would you wait for more? And then my favorite is the little boy who's like, I'll just get to now. I don't have to wait. I don't have to wait till later. I'm going to enjoy it now. And so that was so much fun. But it was just this picture of that is. I know they're little kids, and we think, all right, is it really that big of a deal? It's just a cupcake. But I wonder for you, how many of you would say, yeah, I would have waited for a second cupcake? I would have waited. Because I don't know, maybe I would have, but I know in my life there's often times where it's not a cupcake, maybe it's something bigger, but there's still this moment of, I know there's something better later, but do I wait? Do I wait, or do I just enjoy what's in front of me now? And so ultimately, these kids had to make a couple of decisions. And they had to decide, could they trust us? Could they trust us? Did they really believe if they didn't eat it that they were going to get more? That they had to make that decision. Did they trust us? And then they had to make the really hard decision, and this is where we're going to go for the next couple of weeks, is would they trade something that they wanted now for something better later? What were they willing to wait for something better, but they had to not participate in what was right in front of them that they wanted to do? They had to make that decision, and some made that decision and some didn't. So this week is going to serve an introduction for this series called Passing the Test. How do we deal with the temptations in our lives? So this is going to set us up for where we're headed, and then we're going to spend 3 more weeks getting much more specific on temptation and certain groups of temptations and how we pass those tests. But ultimately, you and I have to make the decision, do we really put our confidence in God? Do we really trust what God says? And are we willing to wait? Are we willing to trade something that's good now for something better later? And so I thought this visual of this test, you've taken tests in your life. You took a driver's test. Well, some of you maybe took the driver's test multiple times, but you've taken a driver's test. You took tests while you were in school. Some of you currently are. You've taken an ACT. A lot of you, for whatever job you have, you had to take a test to have that job, and those tests matter. In the moment, you may have not felt like it did. When you were in school, maybe you didn't feel like those tests really matter, but they did. And oftentimes, these tests would determine where you were headed. They could even determine whether you fail at something or whether you succeed. The tests matter. And so I think with us, we have to realize these tests we face, these temptations that we face, they really matter. They really matter. Whether you pass or fail, it matters. So something's at stake. Something's at stake each time these tests come our way. And so really, I believe that there's more at stake than we really believe. There's more at stake than we really believe when it comes to these tests that we face, these temptations. There's way more at stake than we believe. We think it's just a cupcake. It's really no big deal, but it matters. And so what do we do? And some of these temptations are really small and trivial. Do I have another scoop of ice cream? I have these bowls, and so I know what kind of mood I'm in, what bowl I go for if I want more, and so I have to make that decision when I go to the cabinet to get ice cream. And there's these small little decisions, these small little temptations, these small tests, but we all know there's these big tests we face. If you own your own business or you're just an employer somewhere, will you cut corners? Will you do things that are unethical, even if everyone else is doing it? It's just kind of the way things are done. And you have that test that maybe you are faced with. Will you go to that place that has that thing that you just can't say no to? Whatever that looks like, whatever that is, will you go there? And if you do go there, you'll face with more tests. Will you pass that test? Do I go to that website that I know I shouldn't go to? Do I judge that person next to me who seems to have nothing going right for them? Their house is a mess. They never cut their grass. Their kids are always running around. Do I judge them? Do I assume things about them that matters? Do I get angry at the car that cuts me off? Do I go just a little farther with my boyfriend or girlfriend? Do I share that story about my friend when they told me not to tell anybody? Do I post that thing on social media? Those things where you say, I shouldn't, but, or no one will know if, or does it really matter when? We have those things, all of us. We all have those things in our lives, these temptations that are always pressing in on us. And we have to make this decision, will I pass or will I fail? I'm faced with them too. We are enrolling our son in kindergarten, and for the first time ever, we have to have a permit of occupancy. We bought our house 7 years ago, and we totally redid the whole thing. We never knew that you had to have this permit. And so we have lived for 7 years in our house with no occupancy permit. And so when we go to enroll Kate in school, they say, well, we need an occupancy permit. So I go to get one that I don't have. And so they say, well, an inspector has to come to your house, right? And so several people were praying for us. This was this moment where I'm, oh man, we have to rip everything out of our house that we did because we did everything. And in the back of my mind, there was this game I kept playing. Well, I don't have to tell them everything we did. I don't have to tell them. I can't afford to fix everything. And so when they ask questions, I could just lie just a little bit. And so the guy comes and he says, I'm going to look in the backyard. Well, we built a deck 1.5 years ago. No permit. Wasn't to code. And we didn't realize this when we built it. And so I'm fearful, and I'm looking out the window at him. And he walks in, and the first thing he says is, did you build that deck? I'm like, this is the first test I have to face. I could easily lie, but in that moment, I'm honest, and as hard as it was, I was honest. And he said, "All right, it's okay." I'm like, "Okay, maybe this honesty thing's gonna work out." All right, and so we go through, and he would ask me these questions, and each time there was this moment: Am I honest? And so we have a lot of things we got to work on, a lot of things we got to do, but for me in that moment, there was much more at stake than just whether or not we're going to have to pay a little bit of money. Much more at stake. And that's what we're going to look at today. What's at stake? Early on, Adam and Eve, the first people ever created, God creates them, and they have 2 boys, Cain and Abel. There's this moment with Cain and Abel. They bring offerings to God, and Cain's a little upset because he feels like God's not pleased with what he's bringing, and so then he's mad at Abel. And this is what it says in Genesis 4, 6, and 7. If you don't have a Bible, there should be a red one around you. You can have that. That's our gift to you, or they'll be up on the screen. Genesis 4, 6, and 7. It says this: Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it." Man, this picture, just get this, that sin is just waiting for you. It's just waiting for you. Not only is it waiting for you, but it desires to have you. And then he makes this statement, but you must master it. Because if you don't master it, what happens? It will master you. It will devour you. It will have you. Now, let's just real quickly, as we go this direction for the next 4 weeks, let's look at what sin is. Now, people have lots of different definitions of what sin looks like. For instance, what I'll say, it is breaking a known will of God, a known way of God. Well, how do you know that? Well, one is reading the Scriptures, but here's what I think is beautiful about God. He gives His Holy Spirit. Now, some of you aren't followers of Jesus, and maybe that sounds confusing, but I think everyone has had this moment where you know you should or shouldn't do something. Why is that? Why? Well, we believe that God has put his Spirit here to help us with that. And then when we fail, there's this moment of guilt or remorse or conviction. We know. We know, and so people who have never read this, there's still these moments where we know what we should or shouldn't do. And so here's what I don't want us to do. I don't want us to say that a sin is just a mistake. Because a mistake is why I spelled that word wrong, or I missed my turn. That's a mistake. But sin is much greater than that. It's much bigger than that. It are these decisions that we make to go against what God would want for our lives. And so early on, Adam and Eve have two boys, and from the beginning, they hear that sin is crouching outside their door, and it desires to have them. But you must master it. You must master it. And so for us, going forward, that it matters. It matters because every one of us, we're like Cain. We're like Cain. Sin is crouching outside our door, and it's waiting to have us. And so what do we do? Well, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to have one passage that we're going to look at. For 4 weeks, it's Matthew 4. Matthew 4. It's this moment where Jesus is tempted, but we're going to go back. We're going to start in Matthew 3, because this is going to set us up for where we are heading. So Matthew 3:16. Just so you know, Matthew, if you were here last week, or maybe you watched it on video, you watched it on YouTube, we talked about this guy named Levi, who Jesus calls to follow him. He was a tax collector. He was hated. That is who this is writing this. That's Matthew. And so Levi would have been a Hebrew name, and Matthew would have been a Greek name. And so when we hear this was written by a guy that nobody could trust. For me, that's interesting because God's like, well, let me find someone that everyone likes. Let me have them give the account of Jesus. But no. God chooses this guy, Matthew, to give an account of what Jesus does. So this is what we're going to read. Matthew 3:16. It says this: As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and lighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased." Now let's look at this just for a moment. First of all, baptism is this moment where you decide to immerse yourself in the ways of Jesus. And so what we do is, on the other end of the building, we have this pool. We fill it with water, and we submerge people in the water. And it is this picture of immersing ourselves in the ways of Jesus. It's this picture of dying to ourselves and coming up into this new life. Jesus is baptized, and when he is baptized, there's this voice that says, "Oh, there's my boy. There's my boy." Now, Jesus hasn't really done anything yet. He hasn't performed miracles. Jesus isn't known really, but that's not why God the Father is saying, "There's my boy, and I'm happy with him." The reason he's saying that is because he's his son. I remember when I first had my kids couldn't do anything. Couldn't do anything for me. If anything, they made life harder. But man, I just remember holding them and just loving my kids. And the reason I loved them is because they were mine. And so Jesus has this moment where he's baptized and he hears his Father say, "I'm pleased with you. I'm pleased with you." Identity is so important when we look at temptation. Identity is so important when we look at the struggles and the issues that we have in our lives. Those tests that we face. If we know who we belong to, if we're confident in our Father, it becomes easier to say no to those things we know we should say no to. Okay, let's keep going. Chapter 4. It says, then, so immediately, Jesus is baptized. Then, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. It's just interesting to me. God the Father says, "Oh, here's my boy. I'm pleased with him. Now, Jesus, you're going to go be tempted. You're going to go be tempted." Verse 2. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. I think that's an interesting part that Matthew puts in here. Jesus hasn't eaten for 40 days and 40 nights. It seems kind of obvious that he would be hungry, but just so we know, he's hungry, and there's a lot to that. Verse 3, it says, the tempter came to him and said, If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Jesus answered, "It is written, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and the angels came and attended him. Today I want to pull out 4 things. Next week we're going to look at each one of these temptations, and I believe that each one of our temptations fall into one of these categories. So next week we're going to come back and look at this, but let me just point this out. I think this is really interesting. Jesus has just heard who he is. It has just been affirmed that he is the Son of God. And this is how the devil is going to come at him from the very beginning. He is going to question Jesus' identity from the very start. So for you too, that's going to happen. You are going to walk out of here today. I believe some of you are going to make decisions today to fight really hard to pass the test in your life. And you're going to walk out of here, and there's going to be this voice that challenges who you are. There's going to be a voice that says, no. Are you really following Jesus? Does God really love you? Do you really belong? I promise there's going to be this voice, and it was the same for Jesus. So let's look at 4 things. 4 things. I don't always teach this way, but some of you are like lists, you like bullets, and so this is for you. Number 1, the battle is real. The battle is real. The tests that you face are real and they're hard. It's not simple. It's not simple. The struggles that you face are difficult to overcome. And this is what I see with Jesus. So these are real temptations, I believe, that Jesus faces here. It's hanging in the balance. What is Jesus going to do? And I think it weighs on him. And at the very end, verse 11, it says this, "Then the devil left him, and the angels came and attended him." This word attended, it means they came and they served him. They ministered to him. They took care of him. I get this picture that Jesus is exhausted. I mean, it's been 40 days, he hasn't eaten anything, and then immediately he begins to be tempted. I think spiritually he's worn out. I think he's tired because it's hard. And Jesus is enduring what has been put in front of him. And so the things that you face, the things that you constantly are battling, it's exhausting, and I know it. The things that you don't want to do, but you continually find yourself doing, the things that you try and say no to, but it just seems like every time you continue to say yes, it's exhausting. And it's exhausting even when you're saying no. So you say no, and you say no, and you say no to these things over and over again, but it doesn't get any easier, it feels like. It's tough, and the battle is real. So I believe that what Jesus has gone through here has exhausted him. I watched the Boston Marathon last Monday, and it was interesting. I don't know if you watched it, I run. And so the first mile, there was this dad who decided, because his kids wanted to see him on TV, that he was going to lead the race for the first mile. Now, I don't know if you know this, but the people who win this are really built to win these races. And they run the mile, the men run it from 4.5 minutes to 5 minutes. That's their pace for 26 miles. And so there's this dad who decides, I want my kids to see me on TV, and so I'm going to lead the race for the first mile. And so there's this dad for the first mile who runs a 4.5 minute mile. And so he leads the race. When he finishes 26 miles, he says, that was horrible. That was horrible. Because here's what happens. He's run races before, but that was the worst race he'd ever ran. 30 minutes slower than his pace. Over 3,000 people passed him, right? So he leads for the first mile, and then just person after person passes him. And he gets to a point where he sees his mom and his sister on the course, mile 14, and he's ready to quit. And he sees them, and he keeps going. And when he ends, he just collapses. He says the hardest thing he had ever done. That's this picture that I get of Jesus. That Jesus is running this race and he's trying really hard and he's defeating the enemy, but when he's done, he's exhausted. And so let me say this. We did the series of Jesus Is. Jesus knows what it's like. And he knows that the battle is real and that it's hard. And so for each one of you, this is happening. I know it. Temptation is universal. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter if you're poor or rich. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. It doesn't matter. It is one of the things that unites all of us together, is that we all face these tests, these temptations in our lives. And some of you are here and you would say, you know what, I'm not a follower of Jesus, but you know what? You're tempted too. You're tempted too, and you have these struggles, and I know you do. I know you do. There's these things in your life, you don't know where they come from, but you do things and you wish you wouldn't. The temptation is real. The struggle is hard. And we have to fight against it. Remember, Cain here, sin is crouching outside your door. It desires to have you. It's coming after you. And why is it so hard? Well, let's just be honest. Oftentimes it's fun. It's fun to give in. It feels good. I think it really comes down to this idea of immediate gratification. We live in a culture where we want what we want when we want it. We want it now. We don't want to wait. Look, we saw this with our little kids. Right? Why would I wait for 2 when I have this now? I want it now. And so you and I have to make this decision. Is it worth the wait? Is it worth it? Will we fight against this idea of immediate gratification? Will you decide that God can be trusted? Will you decide that there really is something better that God has for you? A survey was done asking people why they gave in to temptation. So they did the survey. When you give in, when you say yes to the thing you want to say no to, why? 50% said, I don't know. 50% said, I don't know. I don't know why I did what I didn't want to do. 20% said to escape or to get away. 8% said to feel less pain or to help with loneliness. And 7% said to satisfy others' expectations. Why do you? Why do you? What is it for you when you're faced with this test, when you have this temptation? Why do you find yourself saying yes when you want to say no? It's hard. Number 2, Jesus understands temptation. Jesus understands this. He gets it. He's faced with these 3 real temptations. And each time, Jesus has to decide to say yes or no. And so Jesus understands that the battle is real, and he empathizes with us. He empathizes with us. He understands what it's like. There's this guy named Paul who is a follower of Jesus. He wasn't always, but he becomes a follower of Jesus. He plants churches, and then he writes to them. And so we're going to read from this letter he writes to these Jewish Christians called Hebrews, and he's writing them to encourage them. They're being persecuted, they're struggling, and this is what he says to them about Jesus. Hebrews 2:18. It says, because he, Jesus, because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. This word suffered, listen, Jesus suffered when he was being tempted. He's able to help those who are being tempted. Jesus passes the test, and it was difficult. And so for you, when you have these struggles, you don't have this God who doesn't understand. Right? You have areas in your life that you've experienced that help you empathize with other people. I have a friend of mine who sent a text to a group of us who is going through a second miscarriage right now. And so I sent him back a text, and I said, look, my wife and I, we went through a miscarriage a few years ago. I know what it's like. I'm able to empathize with my friend because I've experienced it. There's areas in your life that you've experienced and you're able to empathize with people. This is Jesus. Jesus knows what it's like to be tempted. He knows what it's like to suffer through temptation. He knows. Paul says this in Hebrews 4:15. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin. Let me say this. When you're tempted, you haven't done wrong. This is really, really important. I know a lot of people who come and sit with me and they feel really guilted simply from temptation. But temptation in and of itself is not wrong. What we believe Jesus was perfect, he was without sin, but we know he was tempted. And so let me encourage you here. Celebrate when you pass those tests. Celebrate when you say no. Tell somebody, man, did you know I've been struggling with this and I was tempted by it and I said no? Celebrate those things because we have Jesus who empathizes, who knows what it's like. He knows. Third thing, and I talked about this in the beginning, there's more at stake. There's more at stake than you realize. The things that you're struggling with, you might think, well, it's really not that big of a deal. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody will find out. It doesn't really matter. But there's way more at stake than you realize. So what was at stake for Jesus? You. Jesus goes and he dies on a cross as a perfect sacrifice for you and I. So in the Old Testament, the way they paid for the penalty of sins is they would take a spotless, perfect animal and they would sacrifice it. They would bring it to a priest and they would shed blood, and the shedding of blood was what was made for the forgiveness of sins. And so Jesus comes and he lives this perfect life. And so when he goes to a cross, he becomes the final perfect sacrifice. What was hanging in the balance, what was at stake was you. So because Jesus says no and he passes this test, he's able to go to a cross and die. Therefore, we're able to have forgiveness and hope and life. There was a lot at stake for Jesus. And there's a lot at stake for you. Three things just really quickly. One, your future. Your future. These tests that come your way, when you don't pass them, I believe your future is at stake. Your future is at stake. I mean, do you really believe, I hope you get to a point where you really believe that the decisions you make today matter for your future. Maybe not the, do I have another scoop of ice cream, but maybe. But the things you struggle with, the things you deal with, they matter for your future. They matter. And so if you're tempted to cut corners in your business and you're found out, what happens? You're fired. You have the potential of losing everything. You have a moral failure. It's your future. There is more at stake than you realize. We have a puppy named Norman, 9 months old, and we love Norman, but we hate Norman. And one of the reasons we don't like Norman right now is because he's jumping our fence. Every time he goes outside almost, he jumps our fence. The other day, I can't find Norman. The kids are getting a little upset. I'm looking outside. I can't find him. I go outside. I'm Norman. He walks out of my neighbor's house. Yeah, somehow he gets over there. Our neighbors love him. He's hanging out in their house. Now, here's what I can't communicate to Norman. Here's what I can't communicate. The fence is there for him. The fence is there to protect him. The fence is there to bring life to Norman. I mean, my neighbor got him the other day, and he walked up, and he said, I'm afraid he's going to get hit by a car. Me too. The fence is there to protect, not to hinder, not to keep Norman from experiencing life. For us, I think we often think when we're faced with these tests, God doesn't want me to experience life. It's just the opposite. God cares about your future. He cares about your future. John 10:10, it says the enemy comes to steal and to kill and to destroy. But Jesus comes to give life and give it to the fullest. Your future is at stake with these tests. Not only your future, but other people's future. Other people's future. Look, you've experienced this yourself. You've experienced destruction in your life, pain in your life because of someone else's lack of being able to pass the test in their life. their no's have impacted you. You've struggled, you've experienced pain, you have been hurt because of someone else. So for us, there's a lot at stake. Your future is at stake, but other people's future is at stake as well. And then the last thing is your faith. Your faith. The third thing, your future, other people's future. And then the third thing that's at stake is your faith. This is what happens. I think we behave our way away from God. Some of you are struggling right now, and it's an intellectual thing, and I understand that. But often when we find ourselves away from God, it often comes down to because we've behaved our way away from God. And so the test that we faced, each time we say no, we pull ourselves a little farther away from God. So if this represents where God is, and I'm faced with the test, and I'm walking close to Him, and I say no, what happens is I just slowly begin to move myself away from Him. He doesn't move. He stays the same. He never changes. We begin to move. And so we just move. We say no, and so we become callous to things, and then eventually we're like, man, how have I got myself here? Well, we got ourselves here because here we said yes to what we wish we would have said no. And so I think what happens when it comes to our faith is we lose our confidence in God. We lose our confidence in God. We lose our confidence that God really loves us when we behave ourselves away. We behave a certain way, and then it affects our confidence that God cares for us. We begin to question it, don't we? God, why wouldn't you just take this away? Why am I still struggling? We begin to question and lose confidence that God really cares for us. And then I think we lose this presence of God. Again, not because God has moved, not because God has changed, but we have behaved ourselves away from Him. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake when these tests come your way. Finally, temptation is an invitation. Temptation is an invitation. It's an invitation to move away from God or towards Him. Each test that comes your way, big or small, is an invitation to move closer to God or farther away. Look, it's interesting to me, Jesus fasts for 40 days, and 41 comes, and immediately He's tempted. You're going to have those moments. 41 is going to come. Day 41 is always present. You're going to be facing these trials and these tests, and they may never go. They may get easier to say no to, but they may always be there. They may always be around. Listen to this final one, Romans 6:14. Romans 6:14. So we heard in the beginning that sin is trying to master you, and Paul says this, Romans 6:14. For sin shall not be your master. You could say it will not rule over you. It will not reign in your life. For sin shall not be your master, because you are not under law, but under grace. For sin shall not be your master, because you are not under law, but under grace. Paul says sin will not control you. When you follow Jesus, when you understand who God is, when you understand what God has done for you, sin will not be your master. Jesus has defeated it. And so when it talks about not being under the law, oftentimes when we're under the law, what I mean by that is we're under, or what Paul means by that, is you're under these rules and regulations. And so when we're living under that of just following the rules, so if I don't mess up, if I just do what I'm supposed to, then everything goes well. And so we just work really hard, and we do our best, and we fail, and we succeed. And so often what happens, there's this massive guilt and shame that comes along with all of that. But Paul says, look, you're not under that anymore. You're under grace. And so when we fight the temptations in our life, we fight it knowing that we're under grace. We fight it knowing that God has gone before us and grace goes before us, and that we have the ability and the power to say no because of grace. So the grace is there, yes, when we mess up, and the grace is there for forgiveness, but the grace is also there to empower you, for you to stand strong and to say no to the things that you want to say no to. So when the temptation comes, will you remember Paul's words that sin will not be your master? It will not rule, it will not reign in your life. that you will live, that you are living under grace. And maybe you're not yet. Maybe you don't know about this grace yet. Maybe today would be the point where you move into this reality that God knows you, loves you, sees your struggle, and forgives you. And then moving forward, he will empower you to pass the tests that come your way. And when you fail, the grace is there. The grace has gone before you. The grace will be with you in the midst of those tests and those temptations, but grace is there after. I made these little cards for you. Oh, fumble. See, I was tempted there to say something, and I didn't. That was good. That was good. Thank you, God, for an opportunity and invitation to grow closer. I have these cards for you, and they're at the back door here and at the back door back there. And it just has that scripture on it, Romans 6:14. Sin will not be your master. And then on the back, it says temptation. Let's speak to the temptation. It says, temptation, you will not have my future, my friend's family future, or my faith. I would encourage you to grab one of these cards as you leave, put it in your car, put it in your locker, put it on your desk, put it on a mirror, put it somewhere you see, and remind yourself. Remind yourself. Look, we're going to go through this series, and I'm hoping on the other end of it, we're going to pass a lot more tests than we used to. Will you pray with me? God, thanks for today. Thanks for an opportunity to be honest and real with our struggles. God, I'm thankful for your grace, but not just for the forgiveness of it, God. I'm thankful that you empower us to say no to those things in our life, the temptations that want to pull us away from you. Would you empower us to continue to say no? I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.